My greedy aunt and uncle threw my bags into the cold streets of Madrid, claiming my parents' mansion belonged to them. They had no idea my grandmother left a secret will that changed everything. If you love intense family dramas and seeing justice served, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next stories. I have always believed that those who try to steal what belongs to others eventually build their own ruin. In the beautiful and historic city of Madrid, Spain, where ancient stone walls meet the vibrant energy of modern life, I grew up surrounded by love, warmth, and the privilege of a secure home. My name is Elena, and for as long as I can remember, my parents' beautiful mansion in the quiet, upscale neighborhood of La Moraleja was a sanctuary of peace. It was a home filled with laughter, classic art, and the comforting scent of fresh pine from the surrounding gardens. Every corner of that house held a story. The piano where my mother played classical music on Sunday mornings. The library where my father spent hours discussing history and economics with me. And the beautiful terrace where we watched the sunset paint the Madrid sky in shades of orange and purple. But that peace was shattered forever on a rainy Tuesday in autumn, when a tragic car accident on the wet highway took my parents away from me, leaving me in a deep, dark silence. As a young woman grieving the sudden loss of the two people who meant the world to me, I found myself completely isolated in a world that suddenly felt too large, cold, and unforgiving. The echoes of my parents' voices still lingered in the long, empty hallways, but the warmth was gone. It was during this period of raw, overwhelming vulnerability that my Uncle Hugo and my Aunt Beatrice arrived, pretending to offer comfort. Hugo was my father's older brother, a bitter man with cold, calculating eyes who had spent his entire life in the shadow of my father's successful financial career, always harboring a secret, poisonous jealousy. Beatrice, his wife, was a superficial and malicious woman who wore heavy gold jewelry that rattled like chains whenever she gestured with her long, painted fingernails. They showed up at my doorstep with fake tears, black clothing, and empty promises of support, claiming they only wanted to help me navigate the difficult days ahead, while their eyes greedily scanned the valuable paintings and antique furniture in the foyer. But their true, sinister intentions did not remain hidden for long. Only 2 weeks after my parents were laid to rest, Hugo and Beatrice moved into the guest house, claiming they needed to be closer to protect me. Then, slowly but surely, like shadows creeping over a sunny garden, they began to take over the main house. They started rearranging the family furniture, dismissing the loyal staff who had worked for my family for decades, and treating me like an unwanted intruder in my own home. My bedroom, which had been my sanctuary since childhood, filled with my personal drawings and memories, was suddenly given to their arrogant daughter, Sophia. Sophia sneered at my grief, demanding that I carry her heavy luggage and clean up after her mess. Every single day was a relentless, calculated campaign of psychological wear, designed to make me feel small, powerless, and completely alone in the world, while they slowly drained my father's bank accounts. The climax of their cruelty came on a freezing December morning, a day I will never forget. I was sitting in the study, surrounded by my father's leather-bound books, trying to find solace in his old journals and notes, when Hugo and Beatrice walked in, accompanied by a shady, smirking lawyer named Lucas. Without a shred of empathy, Hugo threw a stack of documents onto the mahogany desk, the heavy paper hitting the wood with a loud slap. He looked at me with a disgusting, triumphant grin and declared that my father had died heavily in debt to his company and that they had purchased the mortgage of the mansion. Beatrice stepped forward, grabbed my arm with her sharp, painted nails, and spat out the words that would echo in my mind for years. "You are nothing but an unpaid tenant here, Elena. Get your cheap belongings and get out. Pack your bags and go live in the street, because this mansion is ours now." Sophia stood in the doorway, laughing and holding a black trash bag containing some of my clothes, which she casually tossed onto the wet pavement of the driveway. I tried to protest, to explain that my father's business was completely solvent and that this was illegal, but their corrupt lawyer Lucas sneered and warned me that resisting would only result in the police dragging me out in handcuffs for trespassing. They did not even let me pack my family photos or the small silver locket my mother had given me for my 15th birthday. In less than an hour, I was pushed out of the massive iron gates of my own home into the pouring rain of Madrid, with nothing but a single suitcase and my dignity. As I stood on the wet sidewalk, shivering in the cold wind, looking at the beautiful house where I had taken my first steps, I saw my aunt and uncle celebrating through the large glass windows of the living room, holding champagne glasses and laughing. Sophia waved at me mockingly from the balcony, holding my favorite childhood book. They believed they had won. They believed that a young, grieving girl would never have the strength, the intelligence, or the resources to fight back. But as I wiped the rainwater and tears from my face, a deep, unshakable calm settled over me. I remembered the words my beloved grandmother, Victoria, used to whisper to me before she passed away. Elena, the truth is like water. It always finds a way to rise, no matter how deep they try to bury it. What my greedy relatives did not know was that I was not as helpless as I appeared. While they were busy planning how to spend my parents' fortune, host lavish parties, and redecorate the mansion, I found shelter in a small, damp apartment in a modest, working-class neighborhood of Madrid. It was a difficult transition, going from a luxurious mansion to a cramped room, but the lack of comfort only fueled my determination. I spent my days and nights working tirelessly with a brilliant, honest, and dedicated attorney named David, who had been a close friend of my father. Together, we began investigating the financial records of my father's company. We quickly discovered a complex web of embezzlement and fraud orchestrated by Hugo over the past 5 years. He had been stealing from the family business and fabricating debts to justify seizing the mansion. But the most significant piece of the puzzle was yet to come, a secret that my grandmother Victoria had carefully hidden before her death. Grandmother Victoria had always been a visionary woman, deeply protective of me because she knew the dark, greedy nature of her eldest son, Hugo. She had built a massive portion of the family's wealth herself, and she owned the actual land upon which the mansion stood. When she passed away 2 years prior, her public will seemed standard, but David and I discovered that she had registered a highly confidential, legally binding codicil with a prestigious notary public in Barcelona. This secret testament was designed to be opened only under very specific circumstances, such as the sudden death of my parents, to ensure that the estate would never fall into the hands of her greedy relatives. The day of the official court hearing arrived. It was held in a grand, imposing courtroom in the heart of Madrid, with high ceilings, heavy wooden doors, and historic portraits on the walls. Hugo, Beatrice, and Sophia arrived dressed in extravagant designer clothes, laughing and whispering to their lawyer Lucas, fully expecting the judge to formalize their ownership of the mansion and dismiss my claims once and for all. They looked at me with smug amusement as I walked in, wearing a simple, elegant dark suit, my hair neatly tied back, and carrying a leather briefcase. Sophia leaned over to her mother and whispered loudly enough for the whole room to hear that the homeless orphan had come to beg for a monthly allowance, laughing behind her hand. In the quiet corners of my small room, with only a dim lamp illuminating the old financial papers David and I spent nights analyzing, I often looked at the faded black and white photograph of my grandmother. She was a strong woman, with eyes full of determination and wisdom, who had built our family's foundations with her own hands. In those long, sleepless hours, when the cold wind of Madrid rattled my small window, I could feel her presence guiding me, whispering that justice would prevail. David would work tirelessly, cross-referencing banking transactions from old accounts in Madrid and Geneva, discovering how Hugo had transferred funds into offshore accounts to make my father's business look bankrupt. This evidence was airtight. When the Honorable Judge Martinez entered the room, the atmosphere became instantly tense. Hugo's lawyer, Lucas, immediately stood up and began presenting their fabricated financial documents, claiming that my father's debts were insurmountable and that the eviction was entirely legal under Spanish law. He painted me as an ungrateful, irresponsible daughter who was simply trying to extort money from her generous aunt and uncle. Hugo nodded solemnly, pretending to be a grieving brother who had been forced to take drastic measures to protect the family honor. Judge Martinez listened in silence, his expression completely unreadable, reviewing the papers presented by Lucas. Then he looked up, fixed his sharp gaze on Hugo and Beatrice, and asked if they were absolutely certain about the validity of their claims and the debts they had presented. Hugo stood up, adjusted his expensive tie, and declared with fake sincerity that he swore on his mother's memory that every document was authentic, and that they had done everything out of love for the family. The judge smiled faintly, a cold, sharp smile that made Beatrice's posture stiffen with sudden, instinctive unease. Judge Martinez then turned his attention to my attorney, David, and asked if we had any evidence to present. David stood up calmly, opened our briefcase, and handed a certified sealed envelope to the court bailiff. "Your Honor," David announced, "we present the certified financial audit proving that Mr. Hugo embezzled millions from his brother's company, along with the authentic certified secret codicil of the late Mrs. Victoria, registered under Spanish law." As the bailiff handed the document to the judge, Lucas, the corrupt lawyer, tried to object, claiming that any other document was irrelevant and outdated. But Judge Martinez raised his hand, silencing him instantly with a single gesture. The courtroom became so quiet, You could hear the rain tapping against the high stained glass windows. The judge carefully broke the official wax seal, opened the envelope, and began to read the document. Within seconds, his expression transformed from calm neutrality to absolute, freezing sternness. The judge read every line of the document carefully, his eyes narrowing as he compared the signatures. The silence in the room was deafening. Hugo adjusted his collar, looking increasingly nervous, while Beatrice began to fan herself with her program, the gold bracelets on her wrist making a quiet, pathetic clinking sound. They had no idea that my grandmother's wisdom would reach out from the past to destroy their greed. The judge looked directly at Hugo and Beatrice, his voice echoing with absolute authority. According to the final, legally binding testament of Mrs. Victoria, the land, the mansion, and 60% of the holding company's shares were placed in a private trust. This trust was designed to transfer automatically and entirely to her granddaughter, Elena, in the event of her parents' demise. Furthermore, the document explicitly states that if Hugo or Beatrice ever attempted to evict Elena or claim the estate, they would be immediately stripped of any minor shares they held and would be subject to full financial ruin. Beatrice let out a quiet, horrified gasp, clutching her heavy gold necklace as if she were choking on her own greed. Sophia's smug smile vanished, and she turned pale, grabbing her mother's arm in terror. Hugo began to stammer, his voice trembling as he tried to claim that the document must be a forgery, that his mother was not in her right mind when she signed it. But Judge Martinez slammed his gavel down, the sharp sound echoing like a thunderclap through the courtroom. Silence! This document is fully notarized, verified, and incontestable. It is you, Mr. Hugo, who have presented forged debt documents and committed massive financial fraud against your own brother's estate. The judge did not stop there. He leaned forward and addressed the bailiff and the court security officers standing near the doors. Under the authority of this court, I order the immediate freeze of all bank accounts belonging to Hugo and Beatrice. Furthermore, given the clear evidence of embezzlement, document forgery, and systemic fraud, police officers are already waiting outside to take both of them, along with their attorney, into custody for criminal prosecution. At that moment, 2 national police officers entered the courtroom, their handcuffs jingling with a cold, metallic sound. Beatrice began to scream and cry hysterically, dropping to her knees and begging me for mercy, claiming they were family and that they had only made a mistake. Sophia was sobbing, realizing that the life of luxury and arrogance she had built on my suffering was completely over. Hugo stood frozen, his eyes hollow with the sudden crushing weight of his defeat, as the officers stepped forward and placed the cold steel handcuffs around his wrists, leading them away. I stood there, watching the scene with a calm, serene expression. I did not feel anger, nor did I feel a desire for revenge. What I felt was a profound sense of peace and relief. Justice had been served, and the memory of my parents and grandmother had been honored. I looked at my sobbing aunt and uncle as they were being led away in chains and quietly remarked that those who sow cruelty and greed always reap their own destruction. An hour later, I stood outside the courtroom on the steps of the Palace of Justice. The rain had finally stopped, and the bright Madrid sun was breaking through the gray clouds, bathing the city in a golden light. My attorney, David, smiled and handed me the keys to the mansion. I was finally going home, not as a victim, but as the rightful owner of my family's legacy. As I got into my car, I knew that the dark chapter was over, and a new, beautiful beginning was waiting for me. Those who try to humiliate others to elevate themselves will always end up falling from their own pedestal. What did you think of Elena's journey and the justice served in the Madrid courtroom? Share your thoughts in the comments, like this video, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of triumph and truth.